couple of hours I'll be talking to you a little bit about blacksmithing. Remember, what you're about to see is intended for those who have done very little or no blacksmithing at all. And here's what we're going to be talking about. First aid and safety. Then we'll go over some ideas on how to make a forge. The minimum tools that you're going to need to get started. Discussing the 8 steps to success, which are heating, drawing. This is not with a pencil and a piece of paper. This is making the metal longer and skinnier, or stretching it out. Bending, setting, which is the opposite of drawing out, making it shorter and fatter. Pushing, poking holes in the hot metal. Cutting the hot metal, hot cutting and cold cutting. Different methods of joining the metal to include forge welding. And last but not least, heat treating. Safety and first aid. Somewhere in your shop you want a bottle of boric acid crystals. Mix these up and have them all ready to go, as I have here in the brown bottle. And I have an eye cup here. These are to wash your eyes out with if you should get a piece of foreign matter in them. Also, get a tube of burn ointment and have these in your shop ready to go. When you're working in the shop, I recommend hard cotton, such as denim, canvas, such as this. Do not wear any Orlon, rayon, nylon, or other man-made fabrics. These are made out of coal, which they also make gasoline out of, and they'll melt. Just burn a piece of nylon and watch it melt. Cotton sparks will just bounce off and usually won't burn you. For pants, wear blue jeans or cotton work pants. Now, I recommend that you go down to your local wherever store and get yourself a shop apron. This will not only keep your clothes clean, but will also add protection. Sparks will just bounce right off of this. Also, and I know a lot of people can't get anything done with gloves on. I can't get anything done with gloves on. But to start out with, for a beginner, I recommend that you wear a pair of gloves, the type that the welders wear, gauntlets, with the gauntlet on top. And then as you get more accustomed to the hot sparks and heat around your hands and body, you can dispense with the gloves except when you need them. There are times when I do need gloves and wear them, but normally I don't wear them. For beginners, though, I do recommend them. Also, safety glasses. I highly recommend a pair of safety glasses because you're going to be working with hot sparks, around hot metal flying around, little chunks of metal flying, and your eyes are very valuable to you. Also, your hearing. I'm going to tell you how to deaden a land mill in a minute here. And this is one of the things you want to protect, is your hearing and your eyes while you're working in a blacksmith shop. Okay, tools. You want to keep your tools in a good state of repair, especially hammers and other tools. They get flanged if they're soft. They'll get flanged off around here. You want to grind or file that off around the edge. And keep all your tools in a good state of repair. I also recommend that while you're in the blacksmith shop, you get a good pair of genuine leather boots. Do not wear the new kind made out of plastic. They'll melt if hot metal happens to hit them. You don't need the iron toe, steel-toed boots, but a good pair of real leather boots that sparks and hot metal will bounce off of. Now, back to the ears. I told you I was going to tell you how to deaden an anvil. A lot of people like to bounce a hammer off of that anvil and listen to it ring. Never hit an anvil, a hard blow with a hammer, without having a piece of hot metal in between the hammer and the anvil. Because I've seen anvils broke by little kids beating on them with a sledgehammer. They want to beat on it and listen to it ring. Now, one way you can take that ring out of an anvil and protect your ears quite a bit, every anvil inside the bottom here, it has a hollow, a cup like, when they pour it. If you'll just fill that cup with lead, hot molten lead, it'll take that ring out of the anvil. Now, I know a lot of people like to hear the anvil ring, but they're your ears, so protect them. Remember, never hit that anvil with a minimum needed to get you started. If you've already got a small shop with a few tools, then you're better off. If you're just starting off, we'll show you the bare minimum that you're going to need to buy. In addition to the place to build a fire, you're going to need a good anvil. Now, this is a machinist anvil, and the way you can tell that is it does not have a punch hole back here. And this one only weighs about 50 pounds. A good blacksmith's anvil weighs about 100 pounds minimum, and they go up to there, up from there. And this one does have the tool hole in it, of course. I'll be naming all the parts of the anvil later on. These are going to cost you $300, $400, $500 if you buy a brand new one out of the catalog. So check your swap meets, junk stores, etc., and for sources of an anvil. Then go down to your local hardware store. Tell them you want a cross-peen hammer or a blacksmith's hammer. This is known by both names, cross-peen or blacksmith's hammer. 2 1/2 pound. If they don't have a 2 1/2 pounder, you go on down the road. Now, if you already have in your shop a ball peen hammer, go ahead and use it until you can get you a good cross peen. We'll be showing you some tricks with the cross peen why we need it later on. While you're there at the hardware store or the junk store, pick you up the largest pair of pliers that you can find. And we'll be showing you how to make these pliers into a pair of tongs a little later on. Also, get you a vice clamp. This is like a vice grip pliers, only it's a clamp, and we'll be showing you how to use that later on for a third arm, which you're going to need very badly in the blacksmith shop. Any blacksmith will tell you. Also, pick up 3 or 4 half-inch bolts. We'll be showing you what those are for in the section on piercing. Another item you're going to need is a good vise. So while you're shopping around, pick up a small machinist vise, unless you can find a good leg vise. You'll notice this one has a leg going down, and it takes up the shock when you're beating hot metal on it. The other machinist vise, you're going to need it mounted on a good stable bench to beat on it. So either the leg vise or the machinist vise to start out with. Forges. Okay, the illustration you're looking at here shows a couple of types you might come across when you're shopping around your local swap meet or junk store. The one on the right, number 1, is 2 separate items, a hand crank blower and a pan, and these are made of cast iron. Number 2 on your right there is called what I call a rivet forge. It ratchets up and down and has a built-in blower, and both of them have what we call a built-in duck's nest underneath. We'll be talking about a duck's nest updraft or side draft forge later on. But these are a couple items that you might come across. And there's no law that says you can't build your own forge out of wood scraps. You see the air there, side draft, about 2 feet square and about a foot deep, and put a metal bottom in it. You don't have to be the big elaborate forges you see pictures of made out of fire brick or building brick. Very simple, small forge for getting started, and the big stuff comes later, if at all. Okay, here's a little forge which I made out of an old hibachi pot, and got some 2-inch T plumbing down at the bottom there, and hooked the air right into the side, and then this comes up from the bottom. Very efficient, works pretty good. It's about 14 inches across. I got some old angle iron and bolted to it to make 3 legs there for it to stand on. This forge here is made from the bottom part of a 55-gallon steel oil drum. As you can see, the pipe coming in from the side here, it is a side draft. Now the difference between a side draft and a updraft or a bottom draft, remember we spoke of a duck's nest, the difference is all the ashes and clinker, which we'll be talking about later on, are gathered in the duck's nest, and it has to be cleaned out every morning. With a side draft, you simply sift out the ash and clinker, and you're ready to go. The clinker settles below the source of air, therefore you don't have to clean it out periodically as you go along. With a bottom draft duck's nest setup, it'll settle down around the grates and plug them up, and you'll have to. But like I say, I took a 55-gallon oil drum, welded some legs on the side of it, got a source of air, filled it with dirt or ash, whichever you have the most of, ash preferably, and it's ready to go. Whatever type forge you use, you are going to have a source of air. You have 3 ways to go here. You can buy an electric blower, such as the one you see laying here on the anvil. You can go with a hand crank blower, such as we discussed earlier, the blower and pan combination, or the rivet forge, which has the blower built in. Or you can build yourself a bellows, such as the one you see here. Very good bellows. I do offer the plans for this bellows. Let's look at an ideal situation on setting up your shop. You have your fire here, you're standing here, here's your vise, and here's your anvil. There shouldn't be more than a step or a half a step between any of these 3, if you have a choice. Nothing more than a half turn away, 1 step at the most. Dirt floor preferred, cement or hardwood, okay. Now if you have a hardwood floor, watch those hot pieces of metal so they don't burn down in and start a fire when you're doing your cutting and other work. Then of course you have your workbench and all your tools. Now be sure you have a well ventilated shop area, especially around your fire here. You're going to have a lot of smoke when you first build your fire, so you want a well ventilated shop area. You may have to install some exhaust fans if you are inside, if you have to set up your shop inside. Otherwise you can get by with just opening some windows, or possibly you're outside under a shed. Okay, you'll notice in my own shop here, I can be standing there at the fire heating the metal, make 1 complete turn around, and I'm at the anvil at the bottom of the picture. Then I can reheat the metal and turn completely around, and I'm at the vise, which you see on the left there. In the meantime, I'm pumping the bellows, furnishing air for the fire. So I have the fire, the anvil and the vise all in one spot there. One turn at the most. Okay, we're going to assume that you've built yourself a forge. Here's the air pipe. Continuation of the air pipe goes through. We've painted, colored it white with some chalk. Your pan, like I said, fill your pan with dirt or ashes and wet them down so they pack real good. Then you should have 9 inches from your air supply to the top of your fire. Roughly 9 inches. 8, 9, or 10. From the air supply to the top of the fire. This will be necessary in forge welding. And it'll also allow the oxygen to burn off before it gets to the metal. That way you will not have a lot of scale laying around your anvil in your shop. Okay, remember that 9 inches. Remember dirt or ashes, whichever you have the most of. Pack them wet. The air supply should be about an inch or so off the bottom of the pan. Also, you can buy a water-cooled tweeter or teary or tire or whatever they call it. I call it an air pipe. As long as there's air going through that, it's not going to burn off. You can buy fancy water-cooled ones and larger ones, but this is all you need really for getting started. Later on you can purchase the big time stuff, but for right now just take a piece of pipe and a connector and connect it into your pan from a side draft. Or if you have the duck's nest down here, hook your air right in to the side of it where it goes. Okay, we're just about ready to build the fire. Let's talk about some coal and coke and clinker. Okay, we've laid some coal and clinker or coal and coke out on the anvil here. This is the raw coal. There are two kinds, hard coal and soft coal. They have fancy names, bifumeous and etc. I just call them hard coal and soft coal. You get either kind, you can. If you have a choice, get the soft coal. It has less silica sand and other impurities in it. The hard coal has more. It just means that you're going to have to clean your forge out more often than you normally would if you had soft coal. Okay, what we're going to do is crush this coal up into pea-size chunks, about as big as your little finger. And then we're going to burn it wet. We're going to make a slurry, which we'll show you a little later on. Make a little igloo and burn it wet. And it'll turn in what will actually be burning is the coke. And this is coke, or coal, which was all the impurities removed by the steaming action of the burning it wet, and it turns into coke. This burns a lot hotter and a lot cleaner than the raw coal. So that's why we do that. Okay, let's look at some clinker. As I said, the coal has a lot of silica sand in it. Silica sand is what they make glass from. So all a clinker is a piece of silica sand melted down into glass, and then being heavy, it settles down at the bottom of your fire. And it'll plug up the air source. This is one advantage of having a side draft. This will settle on the floor of your pan and not in the holes that your air is coming up through. Okay, so all that clinker is a piece of glass, and if you have an updraft with the duck's nest underneath, periodically you're going to have to clean this out. If you have a side draft, you can clean it out once a day, either in the morning before you start out or in the evening when you finish up. Before we get too far into this, there is one more thing we must have to discuss, and that's a matter of the air supply and the hot gases backing up. A lot of time when we build a fire, first build a fire, the gases tend to go from the fire pot down into the pipe. And then when you start pumping again, after you stop, they'll come out and crack, pop like a 22 rifle going off. So to eliminate this, you can do one of two things. If you have the bellows or the hand crank blower and the gases do back up on you, you can install a small electric exhaust fan right here. And this is what we're going to do here with the bellows. If you have an electric blower, of course, you can just install a valve and regulate the air so you keep air blowing out and keep those gases from backing up. Another thing, when you stop pumping to go to work, do any work, the fire tends to die down, and then you have to expend a lot of time and a lot of coal building the fire back up to get your heat. So unless you have a helper to keep pumping and keep that fire up while you're doing the work, it'll die down on you. So there again, with the hand crank blower or the bellows, you want to have that exhaust fan, just enough air to keep the fire going while you're doing the work. If you work long enough, it'll go plumb out on you. So a small exhaust fan installed somewhere along the air line. Now, if you're doing an interpretation, a period interpretation, like at a theme park, running a blacksmith shop, or you have a rig that you go around with, do your research. Don't be doing a 1700 period demonstration with a hand crank source of air. This wasn't invented yet. By the same token, don't have a bellows in a later period, in 1890, 1900 period. They used the old hand crank for air. Some did use the bellows, but do your research if you're doing a period interpretation. If you're just in the shop, like I say, to keep that fire going and to keep the hot gases from backing up, install a small air blower. And there you can see we've installed a small, very small exhaust fan. Number one, to keep the exploding gases from backing up, causing backfires. Number two, to furnish just enough air to keep the fire going. We're ready to build our first fire and generate a little bit of coke. We've ground our coal up, soft or hard, into small as we can get it, and mixed it with water, made a slurry out of it. Okay, step two. We're going to take 2 pieces of newspaper and roll them up into a ball about the size of a baseball. Throw them on there, turn on some air, and then just simply build a stick fire out of some old pine sticks. Now remember, this is your very first fire. It's not intended for doing any blacksmithing. This is to generate coke. This fire here. Okay, we'll let that get going real good and burn down, and go on to the next step. Okay, once we have a nice roaring fire going there and a good bed of coals made out of wood, we've even thrown a couple chunks of raw coal in there. And we've got a good roaring fire and a nice bed of hot stuff. We're going to take and put on a layer of the wet coal, the slurry. Now we'll leave that burn a while, let that get going good. Underneath. Then as soon as that gets burning good, the top is still kind of wet. As soon as it gets going real good, we'll put on another shovelful. And we'll keep doing that until we build up sort of an igloo. We have the igloo built up and packed down real good. Let it sit for 24 hours. Then go back 24 hours later. Now do not break this seal once you have the wet slurry on there and it's all sealed up. And be sure you have a good hot fire underneath. Okay, you go back 24 hours later, take your tin can and your little shaker that you made, and let's break that seal and see if we got any coke down underneath there. Oh yeah. Yeah, this is a pretty good chunk of coke there. Now sometimes you'll have good chunks of coke, sometimes you won't. Most of the time you will have pretty good chunks. Okay, that coked out pretty good. Take your little strainer. Now you can either strain these out on your shop floor if you've got a dirt floor, or start you a sidewalk somewhere. Okay, you get most of the ash shook out of that. You should have left a good can of Coke. Okay, on to the next step. Now, this is the fire. We're going to build this fire out of Coke and go on into some blacksmithing. Baseball, 2 sheets of newspaper should do it. Get them burning real good, and then just dump your Coke that you processed out during the night right on top of there. Now we're getting a lot of ash down in the bottom there, so let's shake a little more ash out there. We got it all. Okay. Now, that down, let that get burning real good. Give it a little air with the bellows or the hand cranker, whichever the case may be. Now you see that smoke? If that does get to be a problem, when you first build your fire, you are going to have smoke like that. If it gets to be problem, just take a piece of newspaper. That is volatile, it will burn. Okay, you rolled up newspaper there and just light it and stick the fire in there, and most of that smoke will burn off. I have seen blacksmiths keep a block of wood burning on top of their fire just for this purpose. Now 30 minutes after you start your fire, there'll be very little if any smoke at all. Just when you first start the fire. Once we have that Coke going, burning real good, once again we're going to take our slurry and build that igloo again, right over that burning hot Coke. Okay, there we have the igloo, and it's all sealed up. Now right here in the front, we're going to poke a little hole to work through. We'll be putting the iron inside the igloo. What we're doing, we're concentrating the heat inside there. The heat is leaching all the impurities out of the coal, raw coal, and turning it into Coke. And periodically, we'll take the back edge of our poker here and we'll beat that Coke down in there to be burnt as the supply of Coke burns out. And then we'll put some more wet coal on. Let's take a look at that on paper and see what we're supposed to be trying to do here. We see an illustration of what we're supposed to be doing. Here's our pan, here's our air source, There's our little hole, and we filled that with coke and started it on fire. And then we put a layer, made an igloo out of the slurry, raw green coal to be burnt. Now, the heat down in here is heating the metal, piece to be heated, and turning this bottom layer into coke, and then it'll burn out hollow. We'll take the poker, poke the coke down in there, and never beat on the top. Always beat it in from the sides here, and let the top kind of take care of itself. Beat that down into the hollow, add more slurry to be turned into coke, and keep on going. This is an ongoing thing as you go along. So you are going to have to learn to be a blacksmith and maintain your fire at the same time. And that brings us right on up to the 8 steps of success, and we're ready to do a little blacksmithing. Step number 1, heating, or as a blacksmith would say, taking a heat. Okay, in this video, it's not our purpose to give you a lot of statistics to remember, temperatures and things like that, a lot of metallurgy, the color of sparks. We're just teaching you how to be a blacksmith. Okay, as you heat the metal, first off you want to poke a hole in the front of that igloo that you built and poke the metal in there. Now, through trial and error, you're going to learn how long to leave the metal in there and how hot it's going to be when you come out. Okay, how hot do we get the metal? The metal is going to go through the spectrum. It's going to go through the dark blues, purples, reds, bright reds, oranges on into the yellows, and from the yellows on into the white spectrum. Okay, that's all you have to remember is colors. Never heat metal white hot. Never get it white. Yellow at the hottest. And it'll be very seldom you'll ever have to get it yellow. Most of our pounding is done at bright red, just going into orange. And this will soften the metal up enough to where you can change the shape of it and bend it. Now, how hot does you're better off holding on to the rod itself or the piece of metal itself. I can get right about right there before it starts getting uncomfortable. So say about a foot from the heat. If you're working with a short piece of metal, use those pliers that we told you to buy, and put them in there with that, and grab them out of there with that. Okay, just remember, bright red going into orange. Now I'll be referring to these colors quite a bit, and like I say, trial and error will teach you how long to leave it in the igloo. Now as you go along, keep pounding that igloo down and keep adding more slurry and more water, wetting that slurry down as you go along. Okay, drawing out. Now this is not with a pencil and paper. This is heating the metal and then making it longer and skinnier. Metal hot, and always draw over a round surface. That's why an anvil has a horn on it. First thing we're going to draw out is a circle. I mean, not, yeah, circle. Point. We're going to draw this out into a point. Now, take up here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Turn it over on its side. Now you'll notice the back, the round shape. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, now that's losing its color. So it's probably ready to go back in the fire. We'll just kind of dress it up a little bit. Take it out. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. 1, 2. And then just finish it on off. Just hit the point end. The end you want pointed more than you hit the fat end. get the skinny end or the fat end. And draw it out square to start with. Okay. Then round it up on the flat surface. Round it up and finish it off there. This time we're going to draw the metal out flat. Draw it out flat. Now always start from the upper end of your draw down to the bottom end. Don't start down here and try to flatten it out going up. Okay, you notice I turned my hammer over and that goes a lot faster. Drawing that, cutting it. Now we're not gonna keep it the same width. We're gonna turn it over. Cut that side a little bit. It's losing its color, so we want to flatten it out and heat it up again. Now each time I take a heat, I am maintaining that igloo, putting more slurry on top of the hot fire, and I'm heating the metal through that hole. Now we didn't get that hot enough. We should have been able to complete this whole draw in one heat. So you want to work as fast as you can and bring it right on up to bright red, almost going into orange. Okay, heat that out a little bit and heat it up. Now it took us 3 heats. Like I said, a good blacksmith, that would only take him one heat to complete that whole thing. Okay, we've heated that up again. The colors that you're seeing on your screen, you're probably seeing a white color in here. The video camera does not pick up the true colors. So don't go by the colors that you're seeing on your screen. Go by the colors that I'm telling you. And like I say, I'm getting a little slow in my old age, but in my younger day, a good measure of your own blacksmithing ability is going to be how much work you get done in each heat. Okay, we'll knock that side down while it's still cool. Flatten it off a little bit. And there we have a flat piece of metal. On this end we have a point. And that'll give you some idea of what's involved in drawing the metal out, stretching it or making it smaller and skinnier as you go along. Okay, we'll go back into the fire now and finish that up. Notice we've drawn a couple of circles on our anvil here with a piece of keel. I forgot to do this before I started. Always aim at those circles, and I'm going to give you a little exercise to do out in the backyard with a board and a hammer. But always aim at those circles and then move the metal back and forth within the circle. Always be aiming at those circles when you're working in flat surface, when you're smoothing something up. Always aim at that circle with the hammer. Or aim at this circle here with the side of the hammer. Okay, that just about finishes up on drawing out. Drawing out is what you'll be doing the most of. Just remember, always draw over a round surface. Use the round edge of your hammer in conjunction with this round surface whenever possible. Don't forget to maintain that igloo and bring your heat right up to the top of the red spectrum, almost going into orange. Step 3, bending. First thing we're going to do in bending is make a little pigtail on this point that we drew out, right around the point of our anvil. This is called a little pigtail. Now, the fat part of the metal we'll want to heat before the skinny part. So you may, there may be times when you're working on an object where you may want to quench that point in water and just work on that fat part. Okay, and there we've drawn out a little pigtail. Now if you want to draw a bigger circle, you can use this part of your anvil. And you can make any size circle on your anvil itself. You stick a pipe in the anvil, get your metal hot, and bend right around the metal if you'd like. Get that on down a little bit. And when that cools off, you've made a little handle. Your thumb goes here, and this goes in the palm of your hand. You've made a little handle. A little pigtail on the end for your thumb to rest on. That shows you how you can bend around a pipe in the vise. Making that decorative twist in a piece of round stock, simply flatten it off first. Stick it in your vise. Now this is where you should want your twist to start. Take your pliers on the other end and simply twist that flat. Now if you have a piece where the handle needs to come up or down, or a piece on the other end needs to be up or down, be sure you twist, you turn it until that is in the right position. But that'll give you a rough idea how to make that decorative twist in a piece of round stock. Square stock, same thing. Put the stock in your vise there where you want to start your twist. Now instead of using the pliers this time, we're going to use our old monkey wrench here. Just put that on there where you want to end the twist and twist it. Now you want to bring this up a little hotter for this twist. Didn't get that in there quite tight enough. But you want to bring this up a little hotter, and also again, if you've got something on each end that has to match up, you want to be sure you twist around. Now gain twist. You've seen items, decorative items, the twist on one end is faster or slower than it is in the middle. This is just a matter of heating. You heat it more on one end than in the middle, and go ahead and twist it. And that'll give you that gain twist. What I call a gain twist. And there you have it. If we wanted to take this bar and bend it this direction instead of, this direction, bend it this way. Okay, we'll see what's involved there. We've made ourselves a mandrel, sort of. Just took a bar and welded it across. Stick that in the anvil. Get the metal good and hot. And simply beat it around the mandrel. Now you'll notice that getting distorted. Every now and then you have to flatten that back out on the anvil. And then continue on around and continue on around. Now, how do we know how long we want that piece of metal to go all the way around that piece of pipe? Very simple. We made ourselves what they call a traveler. You can buy these commercially that are graduated in inches and so on. But what we've done here is made one out of a tin can lid. Simply make a mark on the pipe, make a mark on the tin can lid, and mark it off very carefully in inches with your center punch. There's 1 inch, 2 inches, 3 inches, and make a center punch mark each inch. Then all you have to do, start at your mark here, go 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, 4 inch, and on around till you get back around. Then take your piece of metal and simply roll off however many inches you're going to need to go all the way around that mandrel. The Traveler itself was made for shrinking iron tires on the old wooden spoke wagon wheels. They would go around the iron tire, and that would tell them how much bigger it was than the old wooden spoke wheel. And that'd tell them how much they needed to take out of it or how much they needed to shrink it. You can make your own out of a tin can lid. You can put a handle on it if you want, or like I say, buy one. Now, how do we know exactly where we want to heat that metal, or where we want to make a bend or start a twist? It's very simple. I'll show you a little trick to the trade. Take that metal. Now, if you paint it or draw on it with a piece of chalk or keel, right where you want to make the bend, when you stick it in the fire to heat it, it's going to burn off. So what you do is take your center punch and make you a little punch hole. Then you can heat it, stick it in the fire. To heat your piece, simply take the point on your poker and feel that center punch mark as you withdraw it. And it'll fall down in that center punch mark. Then you know exactly where you want to bend, twist, whatever. When your point of your poker falls down, and that's why a poker has that point on it. So it'll fall down in that center punch mark, and you can tell. If you draw on it with keel, paint, chalk, anything else, it's going to burn off, and you're not going to know where exactly. And a lot of times now, once you get rid of all that scale, you can see center punch mark also, but many times you can't. The point of your poker will fall down in it, and that's the only way you can tell where it's at. We told you you could bend right around the horn of your anvil. We've gotten this piece of metal good and hot, so we're going to bend it right around the point here. Just keep going around, going around, going around, going around, going around, going around, going around. And you see we're bending that into a circle. Screw that circle up on our anvil. Now you can do this with a piece of pipe in your vise, if you'd like. And there we've drawn that flat part where we flattened it out into a circle. There we've made ourselves a little dipper for maintaining that igloo. Hold that in our hand there, thumb rests on there. Put some water and pour it on that igloo. And we've been doing this each time we took a heat. Been replenishing the raw coal on top, the slurry, and then even wetting it down with this dipper. And we're going to make a poker out of it, or a poker just like it, only this end is going to have a point instead of a bucket, and that'll be your first project. Also, you could get yourself a commercial bender. All it is just a plate. This was in the anvil sideways, or in the vise sideways. All it is a plate and 2 studs welded to it. And you simply heat the metal, put it up against one of them, and make your bend. Very simple device. You can either make one of these. I made this one out of a couple pieces of scrap rebar and a floor plate. Just drill a hole in them until they went up through there, and then the bottom I just bend around and place that in the anvil and do my normal bending on that. Step 4, upsetting, which is just the opposite of drawing out. In upsetting, we make it fatter and shorter. One real good example of upsetting, making something shorter and fatter, is putting a head on a nail. Now you'll make yourself a nail header, and that's just a piece of metal. It could be a little thicker, but cut it right down the middle, and then drill a 1/4 inch, a 3/8, and or 1/8, and then half of 1/8 hole in it. And the way this works, simply get your metal red hot, stick it through your hole there, put it in your vise, now the split, when you clamp it down, the split should close and hold it in there. And then simply go around in a circular motion. Around and around in a circular motion until you have the head on the nail. Reposition that so you can see a little better here. There's your nail head, there's your header, and there's the rest of your material on down. And just take your hot metal, stick it up through your header, tighten it up, and go around in a circle on the outside edges until you get the head on there. Then all you have to do is cut it off, draw it out into a point, and you have your nail. One way we can upset the metal is simply get the end of it red hot and just throw it down on the anvil, and it'll get shorter and fatter. Keep turning it around and around so it don't bend on you. Now the old time blacksmiths made goat heads in this manner. Straighten that out. Now you want to bring that right on up into the yellow spectrum if you're going to do this. And you can see that's getting shorter and fatter. Or you can heat the metal and simply take the hammer and beat on the top of it. Hold the metal on the anvil and beat on the top of it. Beat it down and it'll get shorter and fatter. Before we go on, let's take a look at this anvil here a little bit. These names of these parts aren't really important that you remember, but they're handy to know. On the top there we have the face. Now some anvils you'll notice have a weld, a harder piece of steel welded on, and some are just the cast iron, solid. And then you have the table, and we'll be showing you what that's for. The horn, of course, the throat is the bottom of the horn. The legs, of course, are to put a horseshoe on or whatever, hold it down. The hanging end, a lot of times when the anvil was not in use, they'd stick a hook through the tool hole and hang it up out of the way. Punch hole, of course, the anvil we're using here doesn't have one, but the anvil that you have probably will if you get a blacksmith anvil, a large blacksmith anvil. And then we have, of course, the square tool hole. Like I say, these parts aren't really important that you remember. The question always comes up, should the horn be to the pointing to the right or to the left? And the answer is whichever is the most comfortable for you. Try it both ways. Now, normally, by now you've noticed I'm left-handed and I have the horn pointing to the right for the purpose of filming. You're right-handed, and normally the horn would point to the right for a right-handed person, to the left for a left-handed person. That'll probably feel the most comfortable. How high should the anvil be? Notice your elbow here. If it hits the end of the swing when you're swinging the hammer, you're going to get little league elbow, or what we call tennis elbow. It should strike just before the end of the elbow there, just before the end of when it straightens plumb out. Okay, right about there it should strike. So, swinging that, holding on to the end of the handle and swinging that hammer as hard as you can, your hammer anvil should be just high enough so the elbow does not straighten all the way out. I hope I've explained that. Or about from the knee, about mid-thigh. But swing that hammer down and see if your elbow, in other words, way down here would be too low. About mid-thigh is about right. And you want it low for the swing so you can get a complete swing out of it. Like I say, whichever is the most comfortable for you. Try it both ways for about 2 or 3 days on the horn, right or left, and see which feels right. However it feels right, then leave it there. Step 5, piercing. Okay, you may recall we told you while you were down there at the hardware store getting your hammer to pick you up a vice clamp. Simply take this apart, reverse the bottom part, stick this down in your tool hole. Now you may have to grind a little off the back. And the anvil you're using will probably be longer, so it'll fit better. But simply stick that down through the tool hole, put the clamp on the back of your anvil, and tighten up the little set screw. And there you have your third hand for clamping the metal down while you're holding a tool in one hand and the hammer in the other hand. Very handy item to have in the blacksmith shop. You'll recall we told you to pick up a couple of bolts, big, very large bolts, while you were at the hardware store also. And what you're going to do is take the threaded portion, turn it down on the lathe, file it down or grind it down, and make a little punch out of it. If you don't have the hammer punch that the blacksmiths have, you can make one. Now, you could just use a 1/4 inch dowel. I've got a 1/4 inch, 3/8, and 1/2 inch. This is a 1/2 inch here. These are the big holes that I punched the most of. And you can see there I've turned it down, ground it down. So the reason we're using bolts, all bolts the same size, and then making them to size here is to keep from having to make 3 handles. We just make 1 handle. Take this one out if we want a smaller or larger hole, and so on. Okay. For this now, you want to bring the heat right on up, almost going into the yellow. Stick it in your clamp. It's a good idea to have your clamp all adjusted before you start. Find your punch hole there where you hit it with your center punch, right there. And simply hit it with the hammer. Oh, our handle came off there. Now it's kind of like the electrical knockout in an electric box. Okay, after you've made your knockout indentation, turn it over, and you'll notice where it was rubbing on the anvil there is what the blacksmith called the rosebud. I've drawn around it with a little bit of chalk. A little shiny spot there. I don't know if you can see it in the camera or not. Do not reheat the metal. Simply get it red hot, punch it a little better than halfway through, then turn it over, place it over your punch hole. Now in this case we're placing it over the tool hole because we don't have a punch hole. Place it over the punch hole, place the punch on the rosebud, and simply give it a whack. And you'll notice a little wafer falling out there. There's your hole. This was the side that you punched down in when it was heated. This is the side the road bud was on. Turn it over, let it cool, don't reheat it. Just let it cool, place it over your punch hole, or in our case, the tool hole, and simply give it a whack and a little wafer should pop out. Now you may have to keep that from sticking, you may have to give it a little twist each time you hit it with the hammer. Give it a little twist, especially if it's not beveled down here. And that just about covers hot punching. The only other way to get a hole in a piece of metal is with the old drill, the old post drill, or the electric hand drill if you have electricity. You'll notice some little bulges here on the sides of thinner metal, or not thinner, but yeah, thinner this way. You can go ahead and put your bolt through there cold, or your rivet cold, and simply beat that on out of there, or just grind it off straight. On a bigger piece of metal, wider piece of metal, you wouldn't get that bulge. It would be taken up in the metal itself. And cutting the metal. There we've drawn the difference between the cold cutter, or cold chisel as it's commonly known, and the hot cutter. You'll notice the hot cutter is just a straight blade, and the cold cutter's shaped kind of like a barn roof on the cutting edge there. Here we have a homemade hot cutter. I just made a shank, go in a tool hole, a little table, took a piece of car spring and sharpened it up. Now you can still buy hot cutters in a lot of hardware stores that are around horses, places where they do a lot of horseshoeing, the farriers. They still have the basic tongs, cutter, and hammers. But bring your metal right on up to heat, and simply bang it about halfway through there. Now remember your punch mark with your center punch. Bang it about halfway through, then let it cool and knock it on off. Or you can bang it about halfway through and then take an additional pair of pliers and simply bend that off. Okay, these hot pieces that are falling around on the floor when you're cutting, be sure you watch where they go and don't stand on them. You give yourself a hot foot. That's about all there is to hot cutting. The rest of it, of course, is with the old hacksaw and file and whatever. Just remember, don't stand on the hot pieces. You can either bend them off with an additional pair of pliers, or beat them part way through and then on through. Now, never try to bend or cut a piece of metal, tool steel, such as files are made out of. This is very brittle, very hard steel, and it'll simply break and shatter when you try to cut it. Always heat it. Get it hot, almost up to the top of the red spectrum, and then beat it on through. Never try to bend it or break it cold, because it'll shatter. Any tool steel. Mild steel, like we're working with here, no problem. You can probably bend that cold, or you could cut it cold. You dull your cutter, but never beat right on through the metal for that reason. You don't want to dull your cutter. Beat about halfway through and then knock it on off. Anytime you're doing any cold cutting with a cold chisel, be sure you use the table of your anvil here, not the face. Because quite often, when you're cold chiseling, the chisel will go all the way through the metal to cut it off. And this gets quite scarred up. So be sure you use this instead of this, because you don't want to scar this up. Now, if you have a lot of chiseling to do, cold chiseling, you can make a plate. Just a simple little plate made out of a sheet of metal, and cut on that so when your cold chisel goes all the way through, it'll scar this instead of the table. That is, if you have a long or a rather large place to cut. Step number 7, joining. And under joining, we're going to talk about the use of decorative clips, rivets and how to make them, forge brazing, and forge welding. Here are a couple of illustrations, drawings out of a book that will show you the use of decorative clips to hold the pieces together. And here we have a lot of decorative pieces. You can see the little clips that are holding this whole thing together. Now, if you have an electric arc welder, do not make things, curlicues and everything, out of blacksmithing and then weld it together with an arc welder. This is decorative welding at best, not blacksmithing. Do not confuse the two. Do not try to mix the two. If you use an arc welder, call it welding, decorative welding. If you do not use an arc welder, then call it blacksmithing. Riveting. Now you can make your own out of nails, just cut them off, their own diameter. This would represent the two pieces of steel that are being riveted together. Stick that in your nail header or your vise and dome the nail head if it's going to show for decorative purposes. And then drill your hole that the nail will fit through, and like I say, let it stick above that piece of metal its own diameter. And then we'll be showing you a little more on that. Take your two pieces of metal that you're going to rivet and drill your holes in it that will fit your rivet or nail. Take an old bent nail and cut it off like we showed you here on the side of the anvil. Make your rivet. And then just stick your rivet through the two holes. Now that's cut off the diameter of itself. Then simply take your hammer and go around the outside edge in a circular motion. Around the outside edge first. Around the outside edge first. Then just beat that right on down until you have the two pieces riveted together. Now, you can use this side for the decorative purpose. If you have a ball peen hammer, take the ball peen portion of it and kind of hit around the outside edges of that. And I don't know if you can see that or not, but you made some kind of little decorative dents in it. Or you can take the nail side. You can see where we put it in our header and dome that a little bit. And you can even take that side and decorate it if you have a ball peen hammer. And there's the two pieces riveted together. Now you can even do this up to 1/4 inch. Just heat that, put it in your header, put a head on that, cut it off, poke it, drill a 1/4 inch hole in your two pieces of metal, cut that off the diameter of itself, and then rivet the back side of it. So we can make rivets out of old nails, from small finishing nails right on up to 1/4, even 3/8 of an inch. You can even make decorative rivets out of old bolts. Take a bolt and heat it, round the head off, and then decorate the head, make a rivet out of it, and make this part show. On the back side, simply rivet it over. So you could conceivably use that for riveting a large gate or a window covering, something of that nature that you're making. Forge brazing, there really isn't much to. Go down to your local welding supply place or a local hardware store if they handle it, and pick up some brass, solid brass. This has a coating of flux on it I'd recommend that you get the kind that does not have the flux. Just get the solid brass. Okay, heat your two pieces of metal up, and you'll have to balance that piece in there, the second piece. This is very easy until you try to do it with only two hands. And then, once you get the piece heated red hot, simply stick the brazing rod on there and continue to heat until the brazing rod melts around both pieces. Now, if you don't have any luck balancing or putting the piece on there, you can coat both pieces with the brass, and then put the two together. Let the brass cool, put the two together, heat them up, and then the brass will melt together, connecting the two. And that's just about all there is to forged brazing. You might want to try a little of that. It is authentic. The Romans developed this using copper and brass during the classic Roman period to hook their armor together with. So forged brazing is, although you hear very little about it, goes back quite a long ways. Forge welding, okay. I want you to get you a supply of old horseshoes or some 3/8 dowel rod. Okay, we're going to use horseshoes here today. There's nothing mysterious about this or difficult once you get the hang of it. Take these horseshoes and bend them over each other so they're almost touching. And then practice welding them together right there where you have the bend. Now, flux. I want you to go down to your grocery store. You notice I said grocery store, not welding supply. You can get a small can of this for X number of dollars, and you can get a great big giant box for about 1/3 that cost. Read on the label, read what it says, the ingredients. Pure borax. Pure borax. No detergent, no nothing else. Okay, this is going to be your flux. When you bring your piece out of the fire, throw a little handful of flux in there. Now go light on the flux. Don't get too much. You can't get too much. This immediately, the heat melts it into glass, and it carries off the instant rust and scale. There's two things that are going to prevent you from forge welding. That's rust, instant rust, and the two pieces moving. That's the reason I told you to get a horseshoe, so these two pieces, there's no way they can move. You're going to almost need a third hand, that clamp in here, and clamp one piece down and hold the other piece on it and strike it. Okay, let's get a piece hot here and see if we can forge weld it. There we have the two horseshoes together. A little bit of flux on them and a lot of short. There, that took. That'll feel like hitting lead. That took. A lot of short hits. Now, oftentimes your flux will melt into glass-like substance and glue the two pieces together, and you'll think they're welded, and they're not. So you want to test that weld. And if you have to bang on it and flatten it out and distort it, whatever you're making, then that's no good either. Okay, we'll bang around on that a little bit here, make sure that it is welded. Now, if that were just glued together with the flux, it wouldn't be staying together like that. Okay, now, we're going to be working with all different kinds of steel. Like I told you before, the color you're seeing on your screen is not a true color. But we're going to be working with high carbon steel, low carbon steel, mostly steel that we go down to the hardware store and specify that you want low carbon or cold roll. Cold roll. They do not make wrought iron anymore, even though you see it advertised. There's no such. So unless you know the exact carbon content of the steel that you're using, you're not going to know how hot or cold to get it. you're not going to know exactly what temperature to bring it up to anyway, because I could do a whole 2-hour video on just metallurgy, temperatures and color of sparks and stuff like that. So as a beginner, just don't be afraid to play with the color. Bring it up to the yellow, bring it down to the dull red, somewhere between bright yellow and dull red, and try it with each different kind of steel. And once you get it to work with a certain kind of steel, then every time you get that kind of steel, you'll know what color to bring it up to get it to weld. Remember, go down to your grocery store and buy your flux. Wrought iron, you see a lot of decorative wrought iron doors and a lot of decorative wrought iron window coverings advertised. These are made out of steel, and there's no skill whatsoever involved in making them. They buy the steel already the size that they want it, take it into their shop, put it in a bender, bend it into the fancy curlicues, and then take the arc welder and weld it all together. There's no skill at all, and anybody can do it. So just remember, next time you see wrought iron for sale, it's not wrought iron, it's steel and it's decorative welding. Okay, also your fire. Remember to clean that fire out. A good clean fire, remember you're 9 inches from the source of air up to the heat. The piece being step number 8, heat treating. Okay, on heat treating, we're not going to tell you very much because there's not a lot you need to know. We could make a whole 2-hour video just on this subject alone. So, first thing we're going to tell you is annealing or softening the metal up. And this is when you want to drill it or punch it or whatever. You want to soften it up. Bring your metal up to into the orange spectrum and go down to your local hardware store and buy you some lime, a bag of lime. And simply let your metal cool in that lime. Stick it in that, down in that lime, and let it cool there. Leave it there until it's cooled off, and it should be soft. Another way to soften the metal is simply bring it right on up into the orange spectrum. Lay it to one side so nothing's touching it. Just lay it to one side and let it cool until you can grab that in, probably a couple hours or so. And that should make it soft. Now, all metals have more or less carbon in them and other things. And they have a certain temperature where they reach their maximum hardness when they cool very rapidly. We're not going to bother you here with a lot of temperatures. Like I say, we're only bothering you with colors. So, if you'll bring that steel up to probably up into the yellow spectrum. Bring it up into the yellow spectrum and then quench it very rapidly in your water tank. It should reach its maximum hardness, or pretty close to it. Any kind of metal, any kind of metal you pick up, bring it up into the middle of the yellow spectrum and then quench it very rapidly. And for your purposes, that'll make it as hard as you need it to be. Okay, so you'll better understand about this hardness and softness in the metal. Take a piece of steel, about a foot long or so, and bend it into a U, and then heat both ends the same color. Now, before you stick them in there to be heated, take your center punch and mark 2 punches on one end and 1 punch on the other. That's so you can tell the 2 ends apart. So we've got 2 ends of the same metal. Okay, bring them right on up until they're just about going into the yellow spectrum. Give them a little air. When they they get just about up to the yellow spectrum, quench them very rapidly, one side only. Quench it in your quench tank. Cool it very rapidly. Now, when you have that cool enough, yeah, it was cold, I thought it was hot. When you have that cool enough where you can touch it, let the other side cool naturally. Just lay it up somewhere and let it cool by itself naturally for about 2 or 3 hours until you can touch it. Then, take a drill or a center punch or anything you can feel and feel how much harder this side is than this side. This side will be soft, this side will be hard. Then reverse the process. Heat it, reheat it, quench this side very rapidly, and let this side dry, or cool by itself. And you'll notice that the side that cooled by itself is softer than this side. And the way you can judge the hardness of it is by trying to drill it with a hand drill. Try to drill a hole. You'll notice one side puts up a lot more resistance than the other side. And that's about all you need to know really about heat treating. Don't be too fast in quenching everything in your quench tank. Leave it soft. Art metal objects, nobody's going to care whether they're hard or soft anyway. We're not teaching you any technicalities here. We're just teaching you how to be a blacksmith, how to make art objects. So you don't really have a need, if you're getting into knives and exotic tools and stuff like that, then you're going to need to know a little bit about temperatures and what heats and everything like that. But for your purposes, what we've shown you here so far will serve your purpose. Like I say, leave it soft, let it cool by itself. When you're pounding around on it, it's going to cool naturally and be soft anyway. You may want to drill it or punch it, and you don't want it hard from quenching it. So don't be too quick to quench. Let's review very briefly. Remember your igloo, wet coal on top, and as you go along, take the back edge of your beater and beat that down in there to be burnt. And then more wet coal, this wet slurry that we made up. Remember your burning newspaper, if that smoke does become a nuisance, and it should go away within an hour or so after you've built your fire. Heat your metal through the little hole in the front. Now, if say you wanted to heat the middle of this piece of metal and it's going to bump into the back edge of your forge there, you may want to cut it out as we've cut out the front here, so you can get down in the fire with your piece of metal. You may even want to make a door in the wall there for the metal to go right on through, unless your forge is, of course, out in the middle of a room. So don't be afraid to stick it right on through them ashes or dirt and cut out the back side of your forge if you're working with longer pieces. Okay, remember those colors? We're working through that little hole in the front of the igloo, and we want those colors to be in the red spectrum or in the orange spectrum. For very soft work, you want it in the yellow spectrum, never in the white. So you can go from a dull red right on up to about the middle of the yellow colors. Section on cutting, remember we told you to use the table when you're doing cold cutting, cold chiseling, because you have to go through the metal and scar that all up, and you don't want to scar the face of your anvil. Also, get or make you a hot cutter. Like I say, I have used an old axe upside down in a vise to do this with. Bring your metal right on up to color. Don't forget your center punch mark so you know exactly where you want to make that cut. And do not break all the way through the metal. install your cutter. Just take that piece and bend it off. Okay, take this a piece of 3/8, about 3/8 dowel, about 1.5 feet long. Cut that off about 1.5 feet long. Now remember what we said about throwing those red hot pieces around on the floor. Watch where they're at and don't stand on them. In drawing out, remember we said always draw over a round surface or draw out between two round surfaces whenever possible. Larger pieces. For smaller pieces you can use the flat hammer, but always use one round surface for drawing out. Remember, this will be what you're doing the most of. The part you hit the most is the part that'll get the thinnest, the quickest. Remember, in drawing out a point, hit that point the most, draw it out square first, and then draw it out, round it up on the flat table, on the flat face of your anvil. Draw it out square first. Now, drawing out, you'll be making leaves and curlicues and all kinds of decorative stuff out of different sized metal. And all the tools you see in a blacksmith shop, you'll notice we haven't used too many tools here. The only one we told you to purchase at the hardware store, or the only one we didn't tell you, was the cutter. We've used the hammer and the pliers. Be sure that you don't get too many tools that you don't need. And all these fancy tools were for shaping the metal. In the old days, they got the metal in one large block. And if they wanted a piece of round stock, then they had to make it on the swedge block. And there were 2 or 3 or 4 people at the work in the big blacksmith shops. We're talking one man, very small operation. And in a minute, we're going to show you a few objects that you can make using no more tools than we've used here, and the techniques that we've used, which are the same techniques that the blacksmiths used 100 years ago. Okay, when you first start, also don't forget those circles. Draw the metal back and forth within the circle, and then the hammer always strikes the circle. Draw the hammer back and forth within the circle, or the metal, and the hammer will always strike the circle. Even when you're dressing up something, be sure you stay within that circle with the hammer, and then move the metal back and forth. In the section on bending, remember, we took a heat on the end of our metal and bent it right around the point of our anvil. Now remember, the thick part of the metal wants to bend last. The thin part of the metal wants to bend first. So always remember that. You may want to quench the metal, the thin part, so the thick part will bend without the thin part bending. You don't distort it. Okay, there we have our little pigtail. This time we're going to make a little larger bend right around the horn of our anvil. Simply stick that on there and bend it right on around. And then stick it . There you've made a little handle, a little pigtail on it. Your thumb sits on there and that sits in the palm of your hand. Okay, this time we're going to make a little bend, a very simple bend over the edge of the anvil. Simply Get the metal hot again. Stick that over there and just pound it right on around. Now we can do all these bends in around a piece of pipe in the vise, of course. Many ways. Like we told you on the section I'm cutting, this mild steel, cold rolled steel, can be bent cold. It'll brittleize, so if you ever straighten it out and try to rebend it again, it'll probably break off. But that initial bend, it can be bent cold. Your harder, more exotic steels, tool steels, like we say, they'll shatter and break because they're a little more high carbon and got other things in them. Okay, there you made a companion piece for your poker and a little dipper there to pour water on your slurry. And they both have the little handle. You can put the little decorative twist here if you want in the metal. Remember, when you're twisting round, just flatten it out and twist it. When you're twisting square, no problem. Just get it hot and twist it. On joining, remember all the things that we said about forge welding. And get your flux at the grocery store, not at the welding supply house, unless you have a lot of money. Nothing mysterious or difficult about it. Just remember what color you get it to work at, using different kinds of steel. Okay, and remember the section on nails. Cut them off above the pieces of metal to be riveted into its own diameter, and then just peen it on down. You can do this cold. You don't have to do it hot. When you get up into the 1/4 inch size and bigger, then you'll probably have to heat it and slap it in the hole and rivet it over. But below that, you can work it cold. Forge brazing, of course. Remember all the things we said about that. If you get plain, this doesn't have the flux on it like the one we used before. So you want to heat this just warm, then dip it in your little can of flux there. And it'll stick to that, and that'll give it a little flux to carry off the impurities. Okay. Remember about piercing the hot metal. Make yourself a piercer, either grind it, turn it down on the lathe, file it, whatever. Or you can get the regular blacksmith's punches. I'd recommend a 1/2 inch, 3/8, and a 1/4 inch. Anything smaller than a 1/4 inch can be taken care of with a hand drill or the old post drill. Just remember, get the metal almost into the yellow spectrum. Punch it like electrical knockout, then turn it over the rosebud we showed you and punch that over the tool hole, or over the punch hole if you have one, the tool hole if you don't. I don't know if you've noticed or not, but we've completed all 8 steps using just the tools you see here. And like I say, 90% of the tools that you see in a big blacksmith shop are for reshaping the metal. Today we can go down and buy inch wide by 1/4 inch thick, inch square, any size we want. So we don't need all those tools. And we've made our own punch out of a bolt for hot punching. We're going to make these pliers into a pair of tongs in a minute. Of course, the hammer, 2.5 pound. Tell them if they don't have a 2.5 pounder or can't order it, you go on down the road. Don't let them sell you a 1/2 pound hammer or a 5 pound hammer. Go on to the next store until you find a 2.5 pounder. And of course, your third arm, you're definitely going to need this. You're really going to need it bad. A blacksmith would have been a lot better off if he'd have been born with a third arm instead of a nose. And be sure you get a vise clamp and rig it up backwards the way I have here. And no more tools than those, and you can complete all of the 8 steps to success. Take that pair of pliers we've been working with. apart. Now some of them have a red rivet. You may have to file it off, but most of them just have a little, are screwed together with a little square bolt. Take them apart so you have two halves. Then, using an additional pair of pliers to hang on to it with so you don't burn yourself, get this part red hot. The jaws red hot, and then lay them on the anvil and beat them down into a duck's beak, duck's bill. Beat them right on down. Do that with both halves. Then, hanging on to this half, get it red hot again, the handles, and beat them down flat until they're flat. Then, take two pieces of about 3/8 rod, about, maybe 2 feet long or so, and weld them to the handles here. And then beat it all out, round it all up so it's the same shape. The whole length is the same shape. And you will have made your pliers into a pair of tongs. Slip tongs, by the way. You can, these are full of goop. There. If you have a thick piece of metal, you can slip it there. Or if you have a thin piece of metal, you can slip it there. Now, about this duck's beak on your tongs, even if you buy tongs, stick your metal in there. Now, your tongs may want to just grip back here. Get them cherry red, real dull red, and then beat on them with the hammer. Beat on them with a hammer and bend that down so that entire surface is gripping the metal. Do this with each piece of metal. That's why you saw so many tongs in the old blacksmith shop. Tongs hanging onto every size of round stock. Tongs hanging onto every size of square stock, and so on. So, in your instance though, instead of getting all these different size tongs, just beat that down flat to where it's holding on to the piece of metal entire length. And there's your two pieces of dowel welded to your handles. And then heat them up red, good and hot, bang them out so they're the same round as the piece. And there you have a pair of tongs made out of a pair of pliers. Okay, using the 8 steps that we've just shown you, you can make all of the objects that we're going to show you here in just a minute. Also get a pencil and a piece of paper, because I'm going to be giving you a little address to write where you can get a catalog and get all of the blacksmithing tools that you'll ever want. Like I say, you can make any of the items pictured coming up. Okay, here's that address we promised you. Center Forge, P.O. Box 340, Burlington, Wisconsin, 53105-0340. Be sure and write them and ask for their catalog, and then you can order any blacksmithing tool you want. This is a wafer press. And some sugar tongs, 1 lump or 2. A miner's candle holder. Glass top coffee table. This is a modern item. Polished granite coffee table. A set of lamps. Patio flower pot holder. Set of fireplace andirons. A fancy hinge. Another glass top coffee table. The gates you see here are truly wrought iron. They're over 100. One of them is over 200 years old. There's absolutely no modern arc welding, etc., holding them together. And they were in England. Wrought iron gates. At the bottom we have a decorative room divider, and at the top a wall hanging lamp. We have a keyhole on the left and a door knocker on the right. Here's a couple of handles which could go on a box or trunk or whatever. Here we have just a hodgepodge of things, decorative gates, grill works, and door knockers. A candle holder, decorative gate, picture being taken in England. That concludes our tape. I hope it's been both educational to you as well as entertaining. I hope you've learned something from it. Remember, this is for you guys that have done very little or no blacksmithing at all. Some of you old timers watching this tape may have learned a few tricks along the way. That's about it. Adios amigos. Happy hammering.